Hi YouTube, Art here again with another audio video. In today's video, we're going to be doing a roundup of a bunch of IEMs. With y'all's continued support, Linsol has been kind enough to send me out pretty much anything I asked for, so I've tried to get a spread of a bunch of different IEMs at a bunch of different price points on the lower end of things, as well as an IEM from a new company who was kind enough to send it to me, so thank you guys for the continued support. I really appreciate it. I couldn't do these without you. Now, when I have a new standout IEM, I will do a dedicated review for them. There is a standout today, but it is the new budget pick, so we're just going to fit it into the roundup. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. The first IEM we're going to go over is the 7Hz G1. Now this is a single dynamic driver IEM, and it comes in at right around $40, which is an impressively low price. What's more impressive is the sound that comes from them. The bass is very clear, it never gets muddy, it never gets distorted, it has a lot of character and texture. I would liken it to the Shazi P20s, which are currently my top A tier pick at $70. And these are just super impressive in the bass end, which is super important for Call of Duty because a lot of those audio cues are in the bass end of things. The mids are not too forward. Mids can make the sound a little bit nasally or congested. These are nice and recessed without being too ducked, meaning vocals and music are still going to be good. And the high end is a little harsh at times, but not to the point of the P1 Maxes, which can be really tinny and scratchy and scrapey. These sound really, really great across the tonality of the IEM. It comes in a metal housing, which I've become a huge fan of ever since testing the T Pros, which are my current #1 pick at $360. Metal housings, as opposed to resin housings, just get less hot in your ear, especially if you're in a humid place. Resin can kind of build up body oils and give you like hot spots in your ears. These are super small, super comfortable, and they never got too hot in my ears. I think these are gonna fit a lot of different ear types, and I think a lot of people are gonna find these super comfortable. As far as soundstage and imaging goes, these are probably the single most impressive set, especially at this price point. For $40, I alternated between these and my T Pros, and sometimes these feel like T Pro Juniors. They are spacious, there's no floppiness from left and right, really good circularity when I'm hearing audio cues going around. Like the other video, I'll link the video that I used to test that down below in the description. And soundstage wise, I could clearly place where things were, footsteps in COD, how far away they were, what direction they were coming from. And corridos, jazz music, I could really place like the spread of the instruments in the virtual space. They sound great. As far as dynamic driver IEMs goes, this is one of the most 3D sounding dynamic driver IEMs I've ever tested, regardless of price point. They come really, really close to the Shazi P20s. The Shazi P20s are just a little bit more refined and polished, but they're also double the price. Now, as far as detail retrieval goes, these blow anything else at the price point out of the water. The 7Hz Sonuses that I used to recommend, and especially the Truthier Critical Zeros, which have been super popular in the space, these are just so much cleaner, clearer. They hold up to chaotic sound loads like streaks in COD or really aggressive EDM or rock music. It never gets overloaded or distorted from all of the sounds going on. They really retain their detail retrieval through most situations to an impressive level, way above their price point. In EDM and bass-heavy music, the bass feels very foundational. It never gets to the point where it overpowers the rest of the mix or takes away details. It's just a really satisfying full bass sound with a good thump to it that never steps on the detail retrieval ability of these IEMs. As far as music goes, these are fantastic for music as well. Music sounds great. Bass for EDM and rap sounds full. Rock tracks with a lot of stuff going on really holds up on these IEMs quite well. I'll link my playlist that I used to test down below. I am just overall super impressed with these IEMs. I'm even more impressed with the fact that they're only $40. Like some of the other 7Hz IEMs I'm gonna review today, they come with a nice like silicone case that keeps its shape, but feels like it could get smushed down a little bit in your pocket or your bag so it doesn't take up so much space. It's pretty nice. I don't really care about that because I use them in my office all the time. The cable is nothing to write home about, nothing special. Like I say in all my videos, you're better off buying a nice braided aftermarket cable to use. And the tips are just basic tips. Again, I'll recommend always the Tangzu Sancais, which have this like popcorn sealing texture on them, which helps hold them in and helps prevent itching that can sometimes happen from the silicone ear tips. So I'll always recommend those. So I'm not going to go too much in detail in all of the different little accessories that come with it, but it's nothing terrible. The cable's not bad. It's just not great either. These were really hard to place in the tier list, and these are going to be my first sub $100 A tier picks. Now these are $40 like I've mentioned before. The texture, the detail, the spaciousness of them gives something like the Tangzu Fudus a run for their money. The Tangzu Fudus do a little bit better in the detail retrieval department because they are multiple driver, but it is so close that it was really hard to pick. So these are absolutely going to be my new budget recommendation. Heck, if you just want a set of knockaround IEMs that you're not worried about messing up when you travel, these are a great pick. I am so impressed by them. Next set I have are the Tripowin Vivace. Now these are another single dynamic driver set. These are also a budget set at around $40. These are like a resin plastic shell, much more traditional to the IEMs that I've reviewed on this channel. Now, as far as sound goes, they're a lot safer of a tuning than the G1s. They're not quite as bass heavy, and they're also not quite as harsh in the high end. The mids are also a little less recessed, which is a safer tuning for music, but when I played COD, there were times when the raised mids could make things feel a little bit congested. Mids tend to be that kind of like nasally sound. In COD, when you have overpowering mids, you lose a lot of the detail in places you need it, like the high end for reloads and for telling where gunshots are, or the low end for footsteps, which are some of the most important parts of it. So if I were to pick between the two, I'd still do the G1s. These aren't tuned poorly by any stretch of the imagination. They're just not quite as impressive sounding as the G1s. The bass on these is also much less clear sounding, much less textured and refined. These have more of that kind of blurty, like full bass that doesn't really retain any detail. So again, I'll pick the G1s over these. Imaging wise, left and right, they sound great. There's no flop issue. There's no problems here, but soundstage, they're just not quite as open and three-dimensional sounding as the G1s that we just talked about. At the same price point, I'm still gonna pick the G1s for their soundstage, for their tuning. It just, when you're listening to music and there's a bunch of different instruments spaced out from each other, they kind of all blend together. Distances of audio cues in game is a little less clear on these than the G1s, so it just doesn't feel very special. And at the price, like I said, the G1s are gonna win out for me. Because they're less three-dimensional, the soundstage can feel a little bit more stacked, like a bookcase I've described before, and it makes it hard, especially when things get crazy, to tell exactly how far something is away. The direction is no problem, but everything can kind of just sound one-dimensional, and I'm not a big fan of that. Because of those raised mids and that kind of one-dimensional bass sound, they're not quite as great as the G1s, especially at the price point, to retrieve details when things get crazy. So when there's a bunch of streaks going on, there's a gunfight going on in Call of Duty, things tend to get really muddy and muddled up. You lose detail in places that the G1s retain it, so again, the G1s edge these out by a ton. For music, the soundstage and the tonality just kind of makes it meh for me after using the G1s, which had so much detail in the bass, so much depth in the soundstage. These just kind of felt okay, and at $40, I wouldn't be upset for getting them, but if I could spend $40 on the G1s and be impressed, I would much rather do that. Because of the less recessed mids, vocals are more prominent, but when EDM, rock music gets really chaotic, those raised mids do kind of tend to make it sound muddy and congested. So I just don't really like that. This does not include a case. It comes with a cable kind of like the Truth Your Zeros have, very stiff, very thin. It's okay, nothing special. Again, get your own accessories like I mentioned before. And the tips are nothing special. They're kind of flimsy. Like I mentioned, get your own tips, find some that you like and use them across IEMs and you'll be much happier. At this $40 price point, I am going to pick the G1s all day over these. The G1s just have so much more depth, so much more detail retrieval, so much better soundstage and tonality for music. These are okay. If somebody gifted them to me, I wouldn't be upset about it, but they're nothing impressive in my mind. The next two IEMs are gonna be a little bit of misses, so we're just gonna kind of fly through the details on these. The next are the 7 Hz again, Eulas or Eluas. They are a 2 dynamic driver IEM. They're in a resin plastic shell. They're clear, they're small. Sound-wise, the bass is just so overpowering. It's bloated, it's boomy. It kind of sounds like when you plug your ears and you hear yourself talk. There's just no detail in there. There's nothing nice about the bass. The mids are recessed, which make it feel a little bit less congested, but the bass just overpowers any mids that were there, so it's even hard to hear them. The high end on these is not as harsh as the G1s, but the bass is just so distracting. I can't think of anything else but this like boomy earplug bass sound, and it's just not very attractive at all. Now, as far as imaging and soundstage go, the bass ruins it for me entirely. This boomy, bloated, detailless, characterless bass just kind of overrides any soundstage that would be there. It just kind of feels like you're standing next to a subwoofer in a theater or at a show, and it just overpowers everything. The imaging left and right and in terms of circularity is fine, but again, the bass is so distracting, it's hard to even really think about how good it sounds. Now for detail retrieval, you guessed it, the bass ruins it. The bass just lacks any nuance or character or texture. It's a one-dimensional bass that is so overpowering for the rest of the IEM that it makes it hard to pick anything out of the mix or anything out in game. It sounds very one-dimensional. They're loud, but they have absolutely no context of where sounds come from, whether it's music or in-game. So I just really don't know where they were going with these, but they do not sound great for detail retrieval. Music is probably the only okay part for the 7Hz Eluas. In bass-heavy tracks, it kind of works. It feels like you're in your friend's car with the two subwoofers that overpower everything, and it's fine. Again, I would still pick the G1s, or even the Vivaces over this, but the G1s at this price point really blow me away. Speaking of price point, these are $10 cheaper at $30, and it kind of sounds like it. The quality drop-off is pretty noticeable. The bass is just so overwhelming, as I've said 10 times already. And the build quality is just so-so. They look very cheap, they kind of feel cheap, and I'm just overall not impressed with these IEMs. These are gonna be a pass for me entirely. The next IEM is the 7Hz 5, and from the name, it does have 5 drivers, but these are weird. It's 5 dynamic drivers. Yes, you heard me right, 5 dynamic drivers. That means there are 5 tiny little speakers crowded into this IEM. And man, does it do some weird stuff to the sound. Again, these are gonna be a pass for me, but we'll just go ahead and get into it. Again, the problem on these, like the Eluas, is the bass. Now, while the bass isn't quite as bad as the Eluas, this 5 driver configuration that they have in this is just so lacking detail. The bass is one-dimensional, it's boomy, it sounds like bass is getting shouted at you through a tube, and it is super overpowering. Now, there are other drivers there that can introduce the mids and the highs, but the bass is just very distracting. It's not overpowering, it's very distracting because the quality, the detail, the character, the nuance of the bass just is not there at all. I'm used to most IEMs using maybe 2 dynamic drivers and the rest being balanced armature drivers. Balanced armature drivers are much better at detail reproduction, but they can sound a little tinny and harsh, so usually the dynamic drivers are added in there to give it a little bit of foundational bass and body. Well, this is all foundational bass and body, even through the mids and the highs. The mids are not as recessed as I'd like, which can lead to some of that nasally congested sound. And the highs are nice and warm though. So using dynamic drivers for the high end really takes the harshness that you can get some balanced armature IEMs, takes that out and replaces it with like a nice warm bright sound without being too overbearing, so that is some silver lining to these. These have average imaging in terms of left and right. The circularity is fine. I can tell where sounds are in terms of a 360, but when it comes to soundstage and telling how far away instruments are or how far away audio cues are, depending on the tonality of the sound, whether it's bassy or not, I really lose the context of where sounds are coming from. It's because that bass is very one-note sounding. It sounds like I said, it's coming through a tube, and it lacks any kind of detail or character, which is really important for an IEM, especially when you're playing Call of Duty. A lot of the audio cues that are important to you, footsteps, and all of those sounds are going to be in the bass end, and if you have no detail there, no nuance to the bass sounds, it's going to be really hard to separate, say, footstep cues through a cluster or through airstrike. A lot of those things are going to get muddled up. This leads me into detail retrieval, which, as you guessed it, also suffers due to the bass quality here. The bass can just be so overpowering and overwhelming that any kind of ability to pick out details is just glossed over by this bass. And when under chaotic sound loads, like in a gunfight in COD, Final Circle in COD, streaks in COD, a lot of that is going to suffer because the bass is just so overpowering and obnoxious. Another thing about these is they are 5 dynamic drivers, which means they're going to require a lot more power to drive than, say, a single dynamic driver or even a multiple BA with dynamic driver IEM. They just require a lot more juice. I had to really turn up my amp, and that's gonna be a problem for people that are just plugging it into their PC or maybe don't have a high-powered audio source. As far as music goes, because of the bass, they are nice for EDM. I would honestly pick the G1s over these, and that's saying a lot because the 7Hz 5s are like $150, and they just do not sound like $150 in sound. I really don't know what they were thinking with this set. It seems like maybe they had to get some drivers into IEMs to get them out the door, but even in music, I would pick other things. EDM can sound crowded and bloated because of the bass. Rock music sounds fine, but it's nothing special. It's definitely not $150 in sound. These are a miss for me, especially at $150. There are so many other IEMs that I would choose at this price point, or even half the price point. At $70, where the Shazi P20s are discounted to right now, those blow these out of the water in every aspect, and those are a single magnetic driver. So I really don't know what they were thinking with these, but it's a miss for me. The last IEM in today's video is not a miss, and I wanted to shout out Clank on Twitter. He runs Padsmith, which is a company that makes a bunch of mouse pads, and he has ventured into IEMs, and he's released this Padsmith IEM. They are a single dynamic driver, resin shell, beautiful purple IEM, and these are really, really nice, especially for the price of $120. Now, at first, $120 for a single dynamic driver IEM kind of had me scratching my head, but as soon as I tried them, they have probably some of the most refined sound that I've tested in an IEM. The bass is nice and full, detailed, thumpy. It gives you that feeling of standing next to a subwoofer without it being too bloated and in your face. The mids are recessed to a point that I like, where it doesn't feel congested, and the high end is not harsh at all. So streaks, cymbals in music, those are not going to be ear scraping like a lot of other IEMs can be. These just sound really refined, finished, and polished. The tuning also speaks really well to COD. The bass detail, the bass forwardness, and the high end being just not too harsh makes using these for gameplay really nice. Streaks are not super harsh to your ears. Footsteps are very, very clear. They have great imaging and great directionality. The circularity sound, the 360 sound of them is very, very clear. It was very easy for me to tell where sounds were coming from in game, as well as in music. I could clearly place where instruments were around me. Now, they do kind of lack the depth of other IEMs that are multiple driver. As far as soundstage goes, these are less spacious sounding than the G1s, and they are less spacious sounding than the Shazi P20s. They are a much more intimate sounding IEM. They're halfway between that kind of open three-dimensional sound that I really like and the stacked bookcase sound that I don't really like. So they kind of sit there in the middle. So if you were looking for a middle-of-the-road IEM in terms of soundstage and imaging, these are a great choice. Like I mentioned, the bass has a lot of texture, but when there is a lot of it, you start to lose the soundstage a little bit. However, under chaotic sound loads, like in COD, when streaks are going off, final circle situations, the one dynamic driver does start to show its weakness. When a lot of stuff's going on, I really start to lose the detail retrieval ability of these IEMs, which is why I'm such a fan of multi-driver IEMs. When you have multiple drivers, you get like a choir of voices effect, where each driver has its own assigned ability. So when one driver is mimicking the gunshots, then the other driver can take care of the footsteps, because the gunshots are on the high end and the footsteps are in the low end. Now, I'm not trying to poo-poo it too much. At $120, these are very, very impressive, and they're a much more finished sound than the G1. These are much more polished and less bratty sounding than the G1, which I would expect at $120 versus $40. Where these really shine is for music. I've used these a lot, even walking my dog, going out and running errands just to listen to music. And like I said, these are such a polished IEM. All of the tonality, the bass, the mids, the highs, the detail retrieval for music is fantastic. They're very lightweight, they're very comfortable, they sit in your ears fine, they're a gorgeous IEM. And as far as accessories go, these are probably some of the nicest accessories that I've seen in this roundup. It comes with a nice hard case, it comes with a very nice cable that's very much like the cable that comes with Kiwi Orchestra lights, a springy braided cable, and it comes with only one set of tips, 3 different sizes, but they are the tips that I like. They have a lot more strength to the outer walls, so they don't collapse in your ear quite like some of the cheaper tips that come with IEMs. I'm just really impressed with the accessories as well. So if you didn't want to spend a bunch of money on other tips and other cables, these would be a great pick for you. And shout out one more time for Padsmith, Clank. Thank you for sending these out to me to review. I know that's a lot of information, but I'm going to wrap it up with my favorites. If you didn't notice, the 7Hz G1 are the shining star of this review. $40, great 3D sound, great soundstage, great imaging, great tonality, really clear bass with a lot of detail. The only complaint I think I have with them is that the high end can be a little bit harsh, but you play with them a little bit and you'll get used to it. You can even run foam tips, which will take that harshness on the high end down quite a bit. And the G1s are going to be my new budget pick at $40. They undercut a lot of the other IEMs at $60 and $50, and they give you more sound. The race to the bottom with Chi-Fi IEMs is really heating up, and it's really impressive what these companies are able to provide to us. The other shining star of this review are going to be the Padsmith IEM. At $120, they kind of fit into an interesting price point. They're underneath the P1 Max 2s, they're underneath the Truthier Novas, and as far as those two go, the P1 Max 2s can be really harsh in the high end. These are not. The Padsmith are not harsh in the high end. They have a really finished sound. The detail retrieval is fantastic. And they are much smaller than something like the Truthier Novas. The Truthier Novas are a huge IEM with great bass and great detail reproduction, but they are just way too big for some people. So make sure y'all are subscribed with notifications on, because in the next couple of videos, I will be covering some headsets. I know that's rare on this channel, but I've had the opportunity to have a couple companies send me actual headsets to cover, so I'll be branching into that. And I will be live April 3rd over on twitch.tv/art_is_war. We will be playing Verdansk because it is back in Call of Duty Warzone, and we will be testing the audio in there. So make sure you drop a follow over on there on Twitch. Until the next video where I cover some headphones, I'll catch y'all later. Peace.